used by the industry. All right, next up we have Munish, a good friend of mine, and he's going to talk about measuring catastrophe, why critical infrastructure can't survive without a disaster scale. So you actually have like 33 minutes.
Okay.
So you can feel free to elaborate further.
Yeah.
But anyway, good to see you.
Good to see you.
And I turn it over to you.
Thanks. Can I take this mic? I'm a walker. Can I take this mic or can I use your mic?
You can take the mic, but you have to pass, right?
Okay. I will kind of walk. All right. That's good. Hi, everybody. It's really wonderful to be here. I want to thank Josh and Bryson for having me. I've been at Critical Effect a few times, and what matters to me about this conference is that when I walk in, I see a lot of people that I don't normally see. That's actually a really good thing when we're having this conversation, that it's with different folks. What my invitation to you in this conversation is to challenge me, is to stress test. That is not a facetious invitation. I've been thinking and working on this thing. If there's anything I'm good at, it's overthinking. And so I'd like your help to stress test this idea. I've presented this to a number of different communities, but now it's starting to reach wider. And this community is one that I'd like to, yeah.
So do you want this to make it more interactive then? Is that?
Yeah, a little bit,
Okay.
a little bit. Yeah, thanks. Which is to say, pop your hand up and say, wait, that doesn't make sense. How do you do this? What about that? And if I'm going to talk about it later, I'll tell you, but otherwise pop in here. What I'm going to do is give a little bit of a preamble about the why and spend more time on the how and the what. How do we measure disaster in critical infrastructure? And what am I proposing? Less on the why. Let me give you a little bit of a preamble because it does matter. One of my greatest opportunities, fascinating, also mildly infuriating roles, was the first director of cyber risk for the city of New York. And at the time when I started there, the idea that a city would have a standing group of people working on cyber defense was a strange notion. So it was not taken for granted that we were going to do that. No less focused on critical infrastructure. When I asked people around the city, which I often did because we were new, said, how do we do this? Someone must have already figured this out. I assumed that was true. When I asked, how do we map to the 16 critical sectors from DHS, or the 16 sectors? They said, and there was some expletives in here, what are you talking about? What do you mean? What are those? And I was like, the 16 sectors DHS. They're like, I don't know. And I went to as many people as I could because I was like, someone's got to have thought of this. Let me go to emergency management. And they're like, nah, we're kind of aware of them. We talked to FEMA. I don't know. Not only was I surprised, that was my nightmare fuel. That was the thing that got fire in my belly. So that was the first. The second is that I thought a lot about risk management. I was director of cyber risk. Let me think about risk. Most people in the city of New York do not think about risk. The city of New York, and I'm here speaking in my personal capacity, I'm no longer there, not speaking on their behalf. What I learned, hard lesson, most of it was city of New York can take a punch. Not just, we'll be fine. We can take a punch. We've had hurricanes, September 11th. Like, talk to me about how we can take a punch. I appreciate that you want to work on prevention. Can we not take this punch if we get hit? And so my job in some ways was to show them the punch that maybe we could not take. And that led to another area. I talked to emergency management, fire department, sanitation, and I started to ask them, who do you most depend on? And then I would talk to financial services and realtors and transportation, not just for the city, private sector. Who do you most depend on? I understand you've got your stuff on lock, but who are you dependent on that you don't really speak to? And something came up for me, which it made sense in that context. And it was only later that it really started to stick with me. And this is the last bit of the preamble, but really sets this up, which was, what do we do when there is disaster that we know is going to overwhelm our resources? We know it's going to overwhelm our resources. And the best example I could think of, I grew up in California, was a wildfire. Because a wildfire, at a certain point, these engines that we have are not going to be enough. We've got to call in. So I started to wonder and ask these questions. How do you know? How much do you ask for? How do you deal with liability? How can someone from another jurisdiction just show up and start fighting a fire in this jurisdiction? How do you guys do that? There is a full framework in place. This talk is not about that. It's about the other pathway I went down, which is without exactitude that we're always focused on, they can broadly say the fire is going to be this bad. We're going to need X number of engines for Y period of time for Z capacity. We cannot do that in cyber today. We cannot do that in cyber today. Not even OT in cyber, an incident. We can say it's going to be bad. How bad? Worse? Like, it's just kind of this. So I started to get curious about two things. One, how do you measure a wildfire? The size of the flame, the wind speed? Like, I don't know. And the second was the earthquake piece. Again, I grew up in California. We have earthquakes and wildfires. I knew about the Richter scale. Started to get curious. And we all know Richter scale, logarithmic, that's important. What did they do before the Richter scale? How did we go from the gods are angry at us to this is a 6.8? Because that was the journey, right? You can imagine millennia ago, they were just like, oh my gosh, we need to sacrifice a human. The gods are angry. Like that to me was it. There was some journey in the middle. So I got curious about it. That's what I want to share with you is the result of that curiosity. I'm going to spare you the journey in the middle. The journey in the middle was me going down a lot of rabbit holes about the history of disaster scale development. I will give you what I think is the most relevant, which is that the first scale was not the one we use and was surely not the best, but we needed a first. This is my attempt at the first. I say that with humility. I know that it's going to be wrong in certain areas. Richter was not the first scale. I'll talk a little bit about what the first scale was and what we learned, but we wouldn't get to, by the way, we don't use Richter today. We didn't get to Richter without that first scale. So this is my attempt to try and measure. It's an absurd thing, but I've had so much support from people that are like, keep going, try. All right, something. Now, I know people talk about AI slop. I was so glad to have AI to create this image because I really wanted something where all the disasters were in one image. I tried to overlay it. I'm terrible at Photoshop, but here is what I landed on. For those of you that are kind of geeks of risk, we talk a lot about risk taxonomies, if you're students of risk. And there's basically two broad categories. There's natural disasters and what are called human-made, previously man-made, anthropogenic. Those are the two categories. My first posit is that a technology disaster technology is created by people, but it exhibits more of the characteristics of natural disaster in terms of complexity and compounding. Therefore, when we look at what the cause is, we can say humans design technology, but humans are not involved in the way that they are involved in anthropogenic disasters that we can go down and go, it was this human. Could we say a human pushed the button for the bad patch? Yeah. But the way that ripples, the consequence management is more like natural disasters, is more compounding. So what I'm putting forth here is that cyber incidents in critical infrastructure demand the same kind of institutional response that we have around national disaster. This might not be a controversial opinion today. It was, and I think it will become one when we have to answer the hard question, is this or that? You heard Director Anderson talk about ruthless prioritization. This is going to be one of those. 2 talks before this, we were talking about 5% bandwidth in here. That's another one. We have to make some of these choices. So the other piece that became clear to me is communication. And I love my folks at Crocs, and Daryl Haley is awesome. I've noticed a thing in cyber, and it's true in different domains of risk. We use language that is exclusive and not inclusive. And I'm not saying that in the buzzwordy way. I'm saying even the phrase critical infrastructure or industrial control systems or operational technology is not super helpful for the layperson. We're here to try and figure out how do we evangelize this. So one of the things we know, Richter scale, I thought about what am I trying to measure? Originally, I had like operational technology disaster. It's like, nope, you got to explain what operational technology disaster is. Even now, I'll introduce some of the indices that are there. There's the wildfire severity index. That's pretty clear. The Richter scale, we didn't know. I don't know if people know the Saffir-Simpson scale. Probably, maybe. You might, if you work in emergency management? Nodding your head. Yes. Okay, that's right. Fujita scale. Like these are all scales to measure disasters. But what we do know is Cat 5. Got to evacuate. I don't need to be a meteorologist, right? I don't need to be a specialist in disasters to know what Cat 5 means. So when I was designing this, I really thought about the comms here. My audience, not this crowd. There's one or two people who are sitting here that are in my audience. Journalists, public officials, and local public officials, and emergency managers. That was my audience here. Speed of communication, let me say differently, speed of response is a function of speed of communication. And therefore, simplicity of communication, which means, guess what? I'm going to lose some nuance here. I'm cool with that. So here are the three things that are my takeaways in talking about a disaster. Plain language framing of the phenomenon. That there is an element that people understand measurement. I'm measuring something. I know this is going to seem so simple, but this is how it has to work. You know this during disaster, cognitive function really narrows. And you need people to just understand quickly. And the other piece is institutional neutrality. I really thought about how to frame this. So this is what I came up with. I don't love it. I do not love it. I kind of hate it. So I would love your ideas about how to change this. I call it TECDIS, Technology Disaster Impact Scale. I really don't like it, you guys. I'm not a branding marketing person. I live in New York. Genuinely, I'm going to go talk to my marketing people and be like, help me fix this. But this is the demonstration of what I got to. But I really just wanted technology disaster scale. That's it. That's what I kind of landed on. I took away impact actually at a later thing, technology disaster scale. That's it. And I'll talk about some of the technology disasters. Let me talk about what the factors are. Intensity, magnitude, duration. These should sound kind of familiar. They should sound like other disasters. I want people to think about that. I want them to think about cyber as an adjective, not a noun. That happens too often. We say cyber, and then like, that's it. And I want them to think, this is a disaster. There is life safety at stake here. And critical infrastructure, not a question. That is table stakes. We know that. That's why we're here. I'm not spending time on that here. We know that. So now how do we communicate in a way that's clear and effective? So here are the three factors that I came up with. Intensity, magnitude, duration. This came from my study of other disaster scales. The intensity one, candidly, is the very hardest to pin down. I'll talk about where I got there. I'm going to nerd out a little bit on the factors, but I want to spend more time talking about actual disasters and see how it lands with you. Magnitude is the breadth. Here was one that I really struggled with. And then I thought, all right, let's talk about people. Let's center this on people. What's the scale that we're talking about? I intentionally did not use the word scale here. That was here. Magnitude, I wanted people to think about the same way they think about an earthquake in terms of the magnitude of it. I want them to think about scale. And this is not something we often measure in cyber incidents. Candidly, we suck at it. Thinking about populations that are affected, translating technological impact into people impact. We can translate into financial impact. We're getting better. I'd argue we're still mediocre at translating service impact, but actual population. And then duration. Duration is not how long does it last? It's how long till it comes back. Let me say something that when I was designing these, I was designing against what I think we already do today. Paradoxically, what we do today in cyber incidents is hard for people to do in natural disasters, which is the longer view. In wildfires, there's something called fire severity, burn severity. Fire severity, exactly what it sounds like. How bad is the fire? Burn severity, what happens to the soil? Can you still plant trees here? Is this recoverable? How bad was it burned? We focus a lot, and this is not a criticism, it is an observation. we focus a lot on how bad was that, the forensics. What is this going to mean later? But when something bad happens, we kind of scramble to go, is this bad? Is this really bad? And there's a lot of that. This was my goal here, is to go, because we kind of have a sense, of, is this going to be days, weeks, months? I'll tell you the IR teams know pretty well of like, this is going to ruin my weekend. It's going to ruin my week. It's going to ruin my month. It's going to ruin my quarter. And so that's the sense of the return to normalcy. You can and should challenge me on any and all of these ideas. Please don't just accept what I'm saying. And that was a genuine invitation in the beginning to challenge. So before I move on to the scoring matrix, are there any kind of questions or thoughts about this? I'm not going to spread out, like we can bundle Q&A at the end, but I welcome them now because I'm going to build on this.
Is there something about the scale factor itself that, so, Richter scale, most of the scales are logarithmic in nature, which is helpful in one way, but also diminishes the actual magnitude in a different way. So did you consider that trade-off?
I did. And anticipating where we're going here, I decided on a logarithmic scale, and I'll talk about why that matters here. But the short version is, while everybody knows what the Richter scale is, the average person would struggle to explain logarithms and that it's a 10-fold increase. The reason that matters is because people don't need to explain the Richter scale. They just need to understand what certain levels of impact mean. That's the part that I struggle with. As a professional overthinker, that's the part that I struggled with the most. But what about, it's not exactly, this is a just here, real bad. We all intuitively knew that CrowdStrike was going to be bad. And that's because of the scale. The severity of it, in the traditional sense, was not that bad. The blue screen of death is not the worst thing that can happen to a computer. But where it was and how wide, we knew that was going to be there.
So yeah, to your opening, anyone have questions or challenges or thoughts on what Munish is offering so far?
I'm going to ask you a question at the end. I'm going to tell you this right now so you get to think about it. What would stop you from adopting this scale where you are, your organization? I'm going to ask you that question at the end. And some of you I know by name, and thus I will pick on you. But those of you I don't, that will not stop me. I'm genuinely curious, and I want you to go, this would fall short. This would be hard. That's how you can help me here. You're showing up today. Thank you. That would be the most helpful thing for me. All right, let me talk a little bit about the matrix. This is a little bit how the sausage gets made, and candidly, no one cares how the sausage gets made, even when it's delicious. They just come back and are like, can I have some more? So this is very complicated, a little bit of an eye chart. I have a one-pager that explains pretty tightly what it is. Honestly, as someone who cares a lot about methodology, I want people not to care about methodology. This crowd, I do, but broadly speaking, no. Here's the key question underneath each of them. So intensity, how severe is the operational impact? How widespread, how long? So severity, breadth, length. In some earlier version, I had a scale of like 1 to 5, 1 to this, and I was like, way too complicated, 1 to 10. What it considers, again, operational disruption, I'll talk about the 2-component system, population, and technical restoration, automation controls, security confidence reestablished. You should be wondering at this point, Munish, how do we know this up front? How long it's going to take? That's a really hard thing to know, what recovery looks like. I back-tested this against some of the things, and this is where I've talked to practitioners in OTIR. I said, actually, we have a reasonable sense. I'll come to you in a second, Sunil. We have a reasonable sense of how long. Like ranges, I can give you ranges. I was like, great, that's all I need, even if it's a distribution. Now, the examples I give on the 3 to 10 here, I'm not going to walk through all of them, but you'll see I tried to make some jumps here. So a regional facility versus mass casualties. By the way, I have a vivid imagination. I tried to stretch my imagination and say, we have not seen 10s yet. If I index on what we've seen already, the scale breaks next year, 24 months from now. So I did a lot of back testing on like not just looking at the bad incidents, but on earthquake scales, there are millions of 2s and 3s a year. Millions and thousands as you go further up. All right, then a water plant, 50,000 served. That's tough. That's tough that's a 2. I got to tell you, that's tough that's a 2, and it's real. There's a real trade-offs here. And then ransomware, we lose our minds when there's ransomware. That's a 3. That's a 3. So I'm trying to calibrate here, not to be on the worst. I'm going to spend a minute on this, not too long. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, question. Yes.
Wait, hold on. Wait. And I still have a question too.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. I skipped Sunil.
What types of quantifications do you have for intensity?
Oh, good question. I'm going to jump to that in the next one. Great question.
So my question was, there's something very distinctly different between a CrowdStrike versus a NotPetya.
Yes.
A 3 Mile Island versus a launch.
Yep.
A wildfire versus arson.
Yep.
So we're blending those together
Yes.
here.
Yes.
And any consideration in separating them?
100%. 100%. Great point. I will talk about this when I go through them. I thought, should I be considering CrowdStrike? Here is another challenge I'm issuing to us. Does it matter to the firefighter if it was started by arson or not? Yes and no. There might be some components that might change some of their response, but fundamentally, no. And I think that's the big hump I had to overcome, is focus on consequence, particularly in critical infrastructure. Forensically, eventually, and when we talk about duration, we're going to have to talk about, is this an adversary presence or not? But when I talk to colleagues like Ginger and otherwise, they're like, I don't care. I don't care. Business continuity, folks, I don't care. Is it a power outage? Okay. Can we handle it? No? All right. And that's where I'm focused. So I am blending it. This is hard for me to get over and get away from, is the root cause. We're so focused on RCA, and we should be. We should be for prevention. I'm talking about when this happens. So I'm going to talk about calculation method, and then I use CrowdStrike as an example and NotPetya. So I'll get into exactly what you're talking about. Let me spend just a minute on this. I didn't want to include this slide. This is how it happens, how the math is done. You have a base disruption plus a risk multiplier. I can talk about what these are. It's not that I don't want to. I want to spend time on the results, the outcomes. Then you assess magnitude and assess magnitude, determine duration to operational confidence, multiply the 3 factors, use logarithmic, and then a level with boundary awareness. I'll talk about what each of these mean. The best way to do this is by examples. So let me start with Colonial Pipeline. I'm going to start at the end. Barely a 3. Barely a 3. These were hard numbers for me to swallow. I was like, is my scale broken? This doesn't seem right. And then I looked at it and I was like, actually, I think it does in retrospect. So intensity, regional critical fuel infrastructure, plus the risk multiplier is critical infrastructure, but there was no documented life safety crisis. A lot of panic, and warranted panic to a certain extent. A lot of people affected in terms of magnitude. Duration. It took a couple weeks to come back. And I won't go down into the details of Colonial Pipeline, but there's some argument about if this constitutes like a proper cyber disruption. We've spilled lots of ink and used lots of oxygen to debate that. It's not that I'm not interested in those debates. For this purpose, it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter. Because we're trying to figure out what the response needs to be. Remember back to the wildfire. There is a group within the fire department, at least within FDNY, because I asked this question, I was like, when do you guys figure out who figures out if it's arson or not? Like that investigation, when do you start it? Is it ex post? They go, they run parallel, but they rarely cross streams the response. I thought that was fascinating. Like they're there, but they're not like, wait, this might be an arsonist. They're like, go, send the engines, we'll collect all the other things. If they suspect it, they might know. Okay, Stuxnet. This is one that transformed our conversations about adversaries and critical infrastructure and nuclear. You could not get a higher threshold. It's a 3.3. Is that wrong? Again, my instinct was like, this is wrong. This is not right. And when I looked at like how many people affected and the duration,
Are you saying this from the Iranian view or from the US view?
great question. This I looked at from that population, the Iranian view. And I don't know if this is a political statement or not. People are people. We talk about Ukraine, are we going to say, I mean, this is a real existential question. Are those people's lives worth more than these people's lives? Or are we going to say critical services are critical services? This is a Geneva Convention question. And the last, CrowdStrike. It was an outage. It was not an incident. And it was a global infrastructure failure. There was some emergency disruption. There are a lot of people affected across a number of different sectors. And a lot of systems were restored. When I said before, this is my first attempt, I don't know that these scores are right. It's this thing that I'm trying to get broadly right. And this is worse than Stuxnet. So let me put these together and then tell you one last thing. The small score differences have real world impacts, big difference. And, this is where we are today. This is what we've experienced today. Before the Richter scale, there was a 10-point scale. And it was linear. And it basically looked like this. They would interview people who were near the earthquake. And they would go to the houses that were affected and they would see, is the chimney broken? Are tables overturned? How did you experience it? And that was it. That's what they used. Now that, from a starting point, there were other things preceding Richter, but as a scale, that was the one that came before. That's not bad, right? You can already see problems with that. What if the house is poorly constructed? What if it's on bedrock versus mud? This starts to become problematic pretty quickly. So the idea here was to try and put in some rigor and something that was more focused on consequences than it was on causes. So I welcome your questions, challenges. Let me start with my colleague, Bob. Hey, Bob.
Hey, Munish, how are you? Thanks for this. It's fascinating to see where you've taken the work. I think it's related a little to your questions, Sunil, if I understand it. So the 2003 HSPD7 introduces the concept, or at least in U.S. policy, of human economic mission and psychological consequences. Yep. And that's what we always used when we did national risk assessments, that idea. And as I look at this, I think some of Sunil's question, the psychological impacts of an adversary attack versus a man-made attack as an element, and some of the mission impacts of Stuxnet or Colonial Pipeline, I do think this doesn't capture the fact that it fundamentally changed the nature of investment in a lot of different things as a mission impact. So I wonder if you considered the HEMP framework and how you thought about that.
I did. Thank you for bringing it up. Here's what I struggled with. I tried to anchor in natural disasters, and there were two things that came up in terms of the psychological impact. How bad something was falls to the human heuristic of recency bias compared to the last one, and also our change in understanding of what real bad is like. There was that 2010 volcano in Iceland that blocked everything. Everything was shut down. That was kind of a big deal because the last volcanic eruption before that was a really long period of time. So there's this recency heuristic of how bad it is and whether we've ever had something like it before. The psychological piece, not only did I find very difficult to measure, but as I interviewed people and looked at the research around disaster scale management, In measurement, they didn't consider it, but in response and the long-term consequence and investment, 100%. So this was hard for me to separate out, but when I thought we just need a measurement, it didn't consider it, and I was intentional about that. You're right in that the resource investment after is 100% a function, Colonial Pipeline, 100% a function of psychological impact. So to me, there's kind of a corollary that goes with this, which is like, what were the most informative and shifting? That we kind of only know in hindsight. There's very few that in the moment we go, this is going to be really bad, and we know it's going to be really bad, and it's going to continue to be a landmark, really bad one for the next 5 years. Even with wildfires, it's like, that was really bad, but was it worse than the last one? So while I looked at the HEMP framework, I quickly discounted it, not because it's not powerful, but because I was like, I need to stay focused on consequences. If anything, it was discipline for me more than anything else. Thanks for the question. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to support this concept of taking intent out of it, because the concept of intent itself is going to be sort of dissolving over the next few years, with AI influencing people and then people influencing AI itself choosing to do some of these things.
Got it.
Where some of it is accidental, some of it is like, the AI scheming over long horizons.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a mishmash that is just forming, and like, looking at the chains of causality is just more important.
Yeah, I am. Unfortunately, yeah.
Well, the reason why I asked about intent was more on the duration part of the calculation, because I think our estimates of duration are usually going to be based on a set of qualities that we know, and when you have a adversary that's actively working to undermine that, it's going to be much harder to estimate duration.
Yeah, there is one of the pointed questions I ask people who specifically focus on IR and OT is, to what extent do you consider strategic intent when you're thinking about ejecting the adversary? Like, are you thinking, all right, we've got to get them out of the system, but they're trying to dwell here. They're trying to stay. So their pre-positioning is with the idea of, if we get evacuated, if we get pushed out there, we're going to find another way in here. That's kind of always there, but particularly in OT and critical infrastructure, how much do you consider that when you think about it? And they said there was an entire consensus on this, but broadly speaking, there were two buckets where it's like they're, in this particular OT system, or they're in this particular level, and the network isn't wonderfully segmented, but it's segmented enough that it's unlikely they'll be able to move around. This one, they've got free reign. So we know that we're going to be chasing in this one and this one or not. They segment in those two buckets. To your point, very quickly, unfortunately, so I've tried to test this on some recent incidents. Unfortunately, I think the one where this is going to be needed, I'm expecting a CrowdStrike moment in AI. AI is ubiquitous. We knew that CrowdStrike is ubiquitous. And we're going to have a moment like that where we're going to go, how bad is this? Oh, it's everywhere, because everyone adopted it. So we know it's going to be how bad, and we need to quickly communicate to people that are not in this room, that are not technical, should not be technical, that it is really bad. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I've enjoyed your talk. This is the first time I have thought about this topic, so I'm completely new in this. And so I do want to talk about the intent, the effect of intent. I want to like a thought question here. Suppose like you have CrowdStrike 3.58, it was a bug, so it was not intentional, as in it is like a natural disaster, you might say. But let's assume that CrowdStrike was in fact due to some sort of a supply chain attack.
Sure.
What would be the difference in your modeling? I mean, you can project what the difference would be, right?
Or to be more specific, Stuxnet, Iranian Stuxnet is our Volt Typhoon. So where would Volt Typhoon be relative
No,
to?
but the impact would be more people. So like if you look at Colonial Pipeline, it had a certain amount of people impacted. CrowdStrike had a lot more impact than Stuxnet. So the impact level would be the same. Number of people impacted, sorry, the middle measure would be the same. Yeah. The I probably would be the same. Right? But the recovery is likely to be longer, because when it's an adversary, you have to now blow up all your machines almost.
That is, you got to how I tried to capture intent, if at all, was in that categorization around duration. Are we looking at days, weeks, months, years of recovery? And are there circumstances where it is natural and not anthropogenic that we're looking at years? Hard for me to imagine. It is possible. It is more likely that those ones are a result of strategic intent. Sunila, if I might, with the last minute, I think I have ish, or a little more.
No. We'll eat into lunch.
No. I don't want to eat into lunch. I just want to ask a few people to be brave and ask me what and tell me what would stop you from adopting this at your organization. What's missing?
And where's Leslie, by the way?
So consideration of the economic impact.
Okay.
And so you looked at, I think it was looking at loss of life or
Population.
I forgot
yeah.
population,
Mhm.
but I think the economic impact is a question that I still have around that. And then with the scaling, how would that be used? Like, so what is going to be driven by the scaling?
Say that last part again.
So what do you anticipate being driven?
Yeah, like what action do you expect someone to do when it's
Scale now, what, like, how do you?
I see. Okay. So to the economic question, I intentionally excluded it. It's very intentional about that. There's some really solid risk frameworks out there. It's very hard to determine upfront what it's going to be.
No,
Yeah.
no, I don't think it was an economic question.
Oh, okay.
Hey, we think there's a
What
Four-
happens now? Yeah.
there's a 4 coming up. Oh, okay, what do you want us to do?
What do you want us to do?
That was the second
The
one.
first question was economic.
The first
Yeah.
one, I mean, it kind of gets back to understanding what are some of the dependencies. And, if there is an impact in one area, there will be so you think about some of these, we have enough data around things that have happened to anticipate a degree or a range of economic impact. And so that's where my head was.
Interesting. Okay. I disagree on the economic impact. I think we're pretty mediocre at it, even with things like FAIR and insurers and Cyber AccuView. I still think we're pretty bad at measuring range with Monte Carlo simulations and things like that on economic impact. And we really only know ex post, not upfront. But your second question, I really appreciate. What do we do at this scale? You have a Cat 5, you have to evacuate. All right, it's a 4, Munish, now what? And this is kind of to Bob's point is like, all right, we're going to rally resources and invest resources here. Where should they go? There is no cavalry coming. I will invoke Corman here. There's no cavalry coming. That's back to us. This is back to why I say states and locals and munis. They're going to get hit with the 4. They're going to get hit with the 3. We've got to resource them, or we've got to help them figure out how to manage that risk. I hope that comes out of some of the conversations today. My intent here is to catalyze, streamline, and speed that conversation. So thank you again for the opportunity. I appreciate
Thanks.
it.
And I think to a large degree, when we held a series of summits on Mythos, it was, hey, we think a 4 is coming. We all need to get ready. And so, but we didn't have the language to say a 4 is coming. So, okay, thanks. That's really insightful. All right, next up, we have Leslie Skipper. And she's going to talk about strengthening cybersecurity and water utilities, what's actually working. So please give us some good news. Hopefully the answer is not nothing. So